Okay, in today's session, we will be discussing the internals of a building. In the previous sessions, we've looked at the exterior part of a building, and I believe we have covered what I consider to be the essential elements that are necessary and useful for a property inspection or for appraising a potential investment opportunity. In today's session, I will spend more time on the inside of a building. Remember, in one of the prior sessions, I made reference to the fact that in most cases, the exterior of a building will constitute roughly about 90% of the value of the property. By exterior, I refer to the land upon which the building has been structured or built and the structure itself. So by this, what I'm referring to is the land, the structure. First, we have what we call the substructure, and then the superstructure, which is the building itself. The interior will account for about 10% of the value. Now, this is not to suggest that the interior of a building will not be worth more than 10%. What I'm referring to is, from a seller's perspective, he understands that all he has to do is provide you with a beautiful interior. It does not have to be furnished, but it has to be of a design that is appealing. Most of the funds and most of the money that will be spent in the interior of a building will normally be spent in two main areas: the kitchen and the bathroom. Now, I'm referring to a UK market. There are other areas of the world where the living area and the dining area may be important, but in the UK, if you have a building that has a beautiful kitchen and a beautiful bathroom, you're more likely to get much more for your money. So in today's session, I'm going to talk about various parts of the inside of a building. I will begin by looking at the internal structure. Then I will talk about what we call the services within the interior of the building. Next, I'll talk about furnishing. And then I'll talk about space functionality. And once I've covered space functionality, I'll briefly talk about what I call vacant possession. Next, adjacencies. Forgive me if I spell incorrectly. And then I'll talk about common areas. And by this, I'm referring to when you are buying maybe a flat or an apartment. Let's begin. Now, I've laid these out just to give you what I would consider to be a potential guide, so that if you are going to be undertaking an inspection or viewing yourself, that you have what I'll call a checklist of things to, I guess, work with. You know, checklists are very great because you can go step by step and know that you've actually looked at or viewed the most important areas of the inside. The first part of where we'll start with, before I move into this, is what we call the floor plan. The floor plan. Imagine this to be a building in terms of a floor plan. You have the door. Let's say the door leads you into an area of the house. Imagine that to be the stairs. Forgive me for that, leading you upstairs. Let's assume that this is another door. And here you have the living room. And there's another door leading into, let's say, the dining room. And let's say on this side you have another living room. And to the rear you have the kitchen. Just imagine this to be the ground floor of a building, and there are other floors. So you come in, and then you can go upstairs, and upstairs you have, following the same pattern, this being the stairs, maybe I should come upstairs. As you come up to the landing, maybe you have bedroom number 1, bedroom number 2, a study, and then the master bedroom. Just imagine this to be a floor plan. The first thing you must do whenever you're about to view a building in relation to the floor plan is, number 1, verify the floor area. And the reason I say this is because sometimes you might be buying a building and the sales brochure may have indicated that the property is, say, 10,000 square feet, or the property is, who knows, maybe 850 meters square. When we come to discuss the section about how to value a property, you would understand the importance of verifying the floor area. I have provided something that I use. I'll show this to you so you can see. This is a laser tape. The purpose of the laser tape is when I view a property, the first thing I'd like to do once I get into the property is verify. Now, you cannot verify every single area in the property. So what I will do is randomly select various rooms and zones. In many cases, sales agents mislead, sometimes not intentionally, but sometimes simply as a result of negligence or just very poor service, not having as much attention to detail. The brochures they provide will normally make it very clear that the areas are approximate only. And therefore, it's important that you verify. There are occasions where properties have been sold for 850 meters square, but in actuality, the property is only probably about 799 meters square. So 60 meters square, you're losing roughly something in that region. Now, roughly 51 meters square you're losing. That is a lot. If you're paying, let me use various parts of London. There are parts of London where you're paying roughly £10,000 per meter square. If you're losing roughly 50 meters square, that's £500,000 that you lose. Now, this is a big house. And you might think, well, it's only just 50 meters square or 51 meters square. It makes no big difference. It does, because you're paying a price per square meter. If you're paying £10,000 per square meter on a 50 square meter loss, it's almost 500,000. That's a lot of money. So what I would do is I'll take this laser tape and I would measure maybe the dining area. I'll just verify against the floor plans that I have been provided with by the agent. Randomly select some areas in the house. Sometimes I might choose the inside. There are times when you're viewing a property, some properties have shared communal areas, and if you're not careful, the agent will include the communal area. They clearly should not, but they might include the stairs that leads into the flat that you're about to purchase. So number one is verify the floor area. I'd like to show you how this works. If you notice, it measures from that part. You can choose how you want it to measure, but you can measure from this part of the device up onto any particular wall. So you press this and the laser comes on. So let me use an example so you can see how it works. So from here to there, press this, and it tells me it's 0.199 meters. That's all you need to do. So easy. This is particularly important because sometimes when you're purchasing a property, you also want to know what the height, the floor to ceiling height is. So number one is always have the floor plans verified. You can, I believe you can buy one of these. It's a professional one. You can buy one of these easily. You can always use any form of measuring device that you find satisfactory to you. Now, let's move quickly. We begin. Let's start with the structure. Just like we discussed the external structure of the building, it's important to verify the internal structure of the building. In verifying the internal structure, you're looking to understand, or you're hoping to understand, the quality of the structure. And the first thing you should look out for is the flooring. If you view a property that has wooden floors, then it's easy for you to visually inspect, and I guess you can provide an opinion on whether you believe the flooring is of good standard. If you view a property that has carpets, you have to be very, very careful, because sometimes in the lease document, this applies particularly if you're purchasing a flat or an apartment. I'll talk about this in more detail when I come to lease and leases and freehold leases and leasehold contracts. But there are some lease documents that specifically state that flats or apartments above the ground floor. So if you have a building like that has been converted, maybe an existing building that has been converted to a multi-use building, the lease might state specifically that flat number 1 and flat number 2 must have carpet in all areas except the kitchen area and the bathroom area. And the reason is just to reduce noise traveling from one floor to another. Now, what this means is if that clause is in your lease and you're viewing a property which you believe has beautiful wooden floors, there might be a requirement. You might be compelled by a resident to change your floor type, to install a carpet if the noise from the floor is too inconveniencing or too much pain to bear. Legally, let's assume you're buying the first floor flat and your floor has been made into wooden floors. Maybe the seller has simply upgraded the floor to make the apartment look much better and also to effect a sale. The ground floor flat, if the owner recognizes that the noise is too unbearable or believes that the noise is too unbearable, then they can, based on the contract, the lease, they can request that you change your floor. So be careful about that. So I would also say, if you view a property that has a carpet, sometimes a carpet is installed to conceal the quality of the flooring. And what that would mean is that when you purchase the property, should you decide that you would like to, expose the original floors, you might notice that they are very, very uneven. In other words, the floor is not level. Maybe it's a very old floor and it's not level at different locations. And therefore, what people will do is put an underlay, and then put a carpet underneath. So just be mindful of that. And therefore, when you go to view a property, if the carpet is old, or if there are sections of the carpet that you can raise, just so you can take a peek and you can see whether the flooring is of good quality. Number 2, the painting. That's very easy. I need not say much about painting. All you have to do is observe how and what colors the house is. One of the things that I've observed when you're buying a property is most people will furnish a property to their taste. Therefore, you might find a property that you're about to purchase, and you might discover, or you might find out that one of the rooms is blue, it's been painted blue, and another one has been painted red, and another one has been painted yellow. Now, these are experiences that I have had. I remember once a property had a yellow in the kitchen, it had blue in the room, and it had red in a different room. Now, you have 2 things to do. You can make a decision. You can say, or you can decide that the property would need, should you choose to proceed with the purchase, you can demand that the property needs to be repainted to a neutral color. You can say, I'd like the whole property painted white. Now, here's the reason why I'm stressing this. In order for you to repaint a simple flat, that could cost you something in the region of about 3,000, usually about 2,000 to 3,000. The main cost of the painting is the workmanship. It's the fact that you might have to get 2 people and they have to put 2 coats of paint, sometimes 3 coats of paint. The paint itself is cheap. The labor is more expensive. If you're buying an entire house, you might end up spending 5,000 to repaint the entire house so that the colors are neutral. So if you are going to spend between 3,000 and up to 5,000, or between 2,000 up to 5,000, it's important that you take that into account when you're negotiating the price. You can say, I will pay the full price. However, I demand that the full house is repainted to a particular color. My preference is usually to say that I will deduct the cost of painting the flat so that I can get someone to paint it to my taste. So painting is the next. Number 3 is the ceiling. Check the height of the ceiling. Very important. A space becomes more appealing if it has very high floor to ceiling heights. If you're buying a property that has a floor to ceiling height of 3 meters and above, that's fantastic. But the higher, the bigger the volume, the more attractive the space will be. So it's important that you check the height. And also, it's important you check for the condition of the ceiling from the perspective of whether there have been any cosmetics. There are some ceilings where they've done some beautiful, you might have a chandelier, or you might just have at the corners of the wall, they've provided some beautiful decorations to the ceiling. You're looking at the ceiling to identify whether there are any causes for concern from the perspective of repairs, damages, cracks, quality. So it's important you bear that in mind. Then we'll move very quickly to the areas within the space. And by areas, I will make an effort. Well, before I talk about areas, let me talk about the window, because and the doors. The entrance door to the flat or the entrance door to the house is, from the door's perspective, is the most important. I covered this in the previous session. However, the internal doors are also very important. Internal doors sometimes will need to be fire rated, 30 minutes fire rated. So I'd like you to just observe the quality of the doors. Whenever you have a door, there has to be a fire rated door. If it's a 30 minutes fire rated door, one of the most important parts of the door is the frame. The frame itself has to be fire rated also. If the frames are not fire rated, then it means the integrity of the door and its ability to contain fire or smoke is impaired. So therefore, it's important you check and make sure that the quality of the doors look good. All of these, they might seem rather flimsy, but they make a huge difference, especially when you realize that there are costs you have to incur to remedy all of these issues. So the doors are important. Check the quality of the doors. The windows, check whether the windows are single glazed or double glazed. Single glazed windows are terrible for buildings. It would mean that the building is very old. Double glazed buildings are more attractive, both from an energy conservation perspective, but from a building compliance in terms of sustainability, environmental, noise, even beauty. So check that the windows are double glazed. If the windows are not double glazed, then identify how many windows are single glazed. And the reason for the identification is because it would mean you would have to replace the windows. A typical window, if you're going to change, say if there are 5 windows in the property that need to be changed, this could set you back something in the region of about 6,500 up to about 8,000. Also check the type of windows. Is it wooden? Is this a sash window, or is this an aluminum window? Sash windows are more expensive. So if you have an original single glazed sash window, you would have to replace it with a double glazed sash window, and they will cost much more. This figure here is typically the average price for an aluminum window. You might be able to get a sash window for something slightly more. Maybe this could be about 10,000. And the reason the sash windows are more expensive is because of the frame. Sash windows normally have more expensive frames. Imagine that to be the window and that to be the frame. So replacing the frame will be the reason why the price will be more expensive. So I'd like you to just pay attention to the quality of the windows, the number of windows. Usually when I view a place, once I walk into the space, because I have a checklist that I'm using, I simply just go down the lists and I tick, and once I'm done, I've made all the indications, made sure that I've gone through my checklist. The next thing I do is I take pictures, photos, then I make a video so that I can remember. But it's important you count the number of windows, count the number of doors. It's easy to do this because you still will have with you the floor plan. You still have the floor plan, so it's easy to identify. It's easy to identify the number of windows, the number of doors. Just use the floor plan. Keep it simple. Now, let's move forward. We've covered 4 items here. I'd like to perhaps address the next parts of what we have on our list. So we've talked about structures. I have a feeling that there might be something that I haven't shared. I will, should it come back to me, I'll do my best to bring it to your attention. Now, number 2. So the first structure, services. Now, what are services? Well, services are the mechanical, the electrical, and the public health installations in the apartment. Public health simply means drainage. Drainage covers what we call foul, in other words, waste, and what we call rainwater or surface water drainage. Electrical will cover items such as fire detectors, power, lighting, maybe access control into the flats, CCTV, security, and then mechanical will cover things such as heating, cooling, ventilation. So these are services. Now, why is this important? Well, remember that the space you're buying needs to be conditioned. By conditioned, I mean the space you're buying would need heating and cooling in order for it to be habitable. And you are buying the installation as is. So it's important that you understand the quality of the installation. Now let's go through these three items. How do you review the services? Well, we'll start with the first, mechanical. The first thing under the mechanical section, we'll start with heating. Heating comes in two parts: space, so to provide heat into the space, and then hot water, to provide hot water for consumption. In the UK, we normally use a boiler. So all you have to do is find the boiler. If you're buying a house, usually because of the size of the house, you might find that the boiler is quite large, and therefore you will have something what's called a cylinder, a hot water cylinder that stores the hot water, and then the boiler provides hot water to this cylinder, but also provides heating to the radiators serving the house. So you might find that the various rooms in the house have radiators. Two things to take into account. I'd like you to check the type and the quality of the boiler. Each boiler should have a certificate. In other words, you need to check to see that it's been inspected recently and that it has a boiler certificate. Otherwise, you might find that you're buying a house where the boiler is quite old, and it would mean you need to replace it. Now, just to replace the boiler could set you back something in the region of about £2,000, depending on the type, the size. But also, I'd like you to check and see if it's a house where the hot water cylinder is located. Usually when you replace the hot water, the boiler, sometimes, not always, you might have to replace the hot water cylinder. So it's important you check for both. The next thing I'd like you to do will be to check the quality of the radiators. Now, imagine this to be a radiator, and normally you would have water coming in and water going out. At the bottom of the radiator, you have the connection points. Leaks are extremely unwanted in a property that you're buying. So I'd like you to just make an observation. Usually when you go to a radiator, just observe at the bottom of the radiator whether there are any leaks on the floor, or just at the point where the pipe connects into the radiator, or where the point where the pipe comes out from the radiator. Observe that to see if there are any leaks. Check the quality of the radiator. Does it look old? Radiators are simply made of different materials. Some of them are simply steel. Most radiators have a life of about 15 to 20 years before the warranty runs out. There are radiators that can last for 30 or 40 years, but corrosion could cause leaks and cracks. So you want to check and see what the age of the radiator could be. Just take a picture, send it to a friend or send it to someone who works. Nowadays you can post pictures online and ask people to comment. You can just ask, does anyone know how old this radiator might be? The reason for that is because in order for you to change the radiators and the boilers in the house, in addition to changing the boiler, to replace all the radiators, you might be spending close to £4,000. Now, this is important. It's important to know how much you might be incurring as a result of buying a property that has a dated installation. And that's the heating. The next, I should have mentioned that under the mechanical, you also have water supply. Water supply, I guess, is something I should mention. I'll cover it later on, but for now, let me just state that water, when it's provided to a building, you have a water meter. Ideally, you want to know where the water meter is located, and then you want to know whether there is a tank, a water tank, in the property. Sometimes some buildings will have a water tank in the loft. So imagine that you're buying the entire house and the water comes in and it goes up to the water tank. Water comes into the building, goes up to the water tank, and then from the water tank, water is supplied to the entire building. So you want to know where that water tank is, and you also want to see the condition, because sometimes they may have exceeded their useful life. Water tanks have a useful life of roughly about 15 to 20 years, depending on the type. Some might go up to about 25 years. But when it gets too old, it needs to be replaced. But more importantly, they need to be maintained. So if you have an installation that does not have a water tank, it's much more, it's preferable than having an installation that has a water tank. And the reason is because whenever you have water stored, it needs regular cleaning. The tank needs to be cleaned, the water needs to be flushed regularly, just to avoid stagnation or Legionnaire's disease. So it's important you check for where the water is. Now, that covers the mechanical aspect. Electrical, what you're looking for is the fuse board. The electricity meter will be somewhere within, either external or internal to the building. From the meter, power is distributed to a fuse board, and from the fuse board, you have all the different circuits, lights, cooker, switches, bathroom, ventilation, etc. So you just want to look and see, and also check and see whether the fuse board and the electrical installation is modern, and you also want to check and see if it has a certificate of inspection. Finally, drainage. There is usually very little